When I consider all the major issues facing humanity today, facing our world, all the wars, all the violence, growing inequality, crippling poverty, the collapse of our democratic systems, environmental degradation, extreme weather conditions. When I consider it all together, there's a pattern that connects every single major issue we face, and it goes back several thousand years in human history. And the pattern goes back when our ancestors moved away from the earth and ceased to understand that we are in fact a critical part of the whole of nature. The pattern began when nature became something to be conquered, not something to be worshipped. Referring here to the original meaning of that word, which was worth shaping. To worship nature is not to put it on a pedestal, bowing in fear to its incredible power. Instead, to worship nature is a recognition of the power, respecting the power, and so letting the natural order of things give shape to our values and our activities. It's a recognition that we do not and cannot fully understand the full scope of nature. And so any attempt to control it and make it conform to the limitations of our imagination will ultimately lead to problems. Every time we think we have one problem solved, 10 more will be created by our solution. Now, a few weeks ago, I talked about the difference between an ethic of domination, which is what I'm talking about, the domination of nature, versus an ethic of risk. I pointed out that domination is the foundation of our society, and it's based largely on theology and philosophies of domination that are nearly as old as civilization. Back when we stopped worshiping nature. When we stopped seeing ourselves as part and particle of the natural world, putting ourselves on a pedestal above the animals and plants. And I talked about an ethic of risk, which is modeled on the universe itself. Just as the universe, with no master plans or guarantees of success, created this matrix of possibility out of which each evolutionary step emerged. False starts and evolutionary dead ends included. That's the risk. There's no guarantees. And just like the universe, we can follow suit. An ethic of risk invites us to move in the direction of our dreams, taking responsible action that is grounded in community and strategic risk-taking, developing the matrix of success as we go. You look at the horrors of the 20th century, and so many of them were caused because some group or one individual had a vision of how things should be. And so everybody who didn't fit that particular vision, well, they had to be killed, destroyed, enslaved. So when we have a vision of the future, we have to hold it in our hand like this, not like this. Like water, let it flow. As Dyer pointed out, when we try to hold on to water, it just all leaks away. But if we gently hold it in the palm of our hand, we can take it with us wherever we go. And let it move as we move. In light of Irma and Harvey, in light of the fires out west, the flooding in Asia, the flooding that most of our media ignores because of Irma and Harvey, in light of everything that's going on in the world, I wrote the following reflection on one of my morning Facebook posts. I said, all of our science and all of our religion, all of our planning and preparations all fall to naught when put to the test. The winds, the seas, the rain remind us that we cannot conquer and control nature. The sages of old taught us to be like water, which takes the shape of its surroundings. We must learn the limits of our manipulations, take the shape of our surroundings, and become native to this place we call home. Of course, that particular sage I had in mind was Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching. We heard Wayne Dyer take on Lao Tzu earlier. But for a reminder, chapter 8 of the Tao Te Ching reads, the highest form of goodness is like water, or is water. Water knows how to benefit all things without striving with them. It stays in places loathed by all men. There it comes near the Tao. Knowing hurricanes are a thing, knowing wind and rain and floods happen, what would a city look like that was designed with that in mind, as opposed to in spite of that, as we tend to do? The Spanish came to this continent and built this city. And they tried to replicate what they had in Europe. The English did the same. All the colonizers did the same. And we continue that tradition. And that means we make things bigger and stronger and harder. Instead of actually looking and say, what does this landscape, what does this environment need from us? How shall we respond to this particular environment? Chapter 78 of the Tao Te Ching reminds us, nothing in the world is softer and weaker than water. But for attacking the hard and strong, there is nothing like it. For nothing can take its place. That the weak overcomes the strong and the soft overcomes the hard. This is something known by all, but practiced by none. There was a time in our own history when the natural rhythms of the earth, plants and animals, that we share this blue boat home, were the core of our value system. They shaped our customs and were the foundation of the decision-making process. And now it's anathema to consider the environment if it interferes with economic concerns or jobs, future generations, and nature be damned. In our struggle to control and conquer nature, we have forgotten that we are nature. We are nature made conscious, and it's time to remember ourselves as such. To remember ourselves as part of the natural order of things. To remember ourselves into that interdependent web of existence that is made from holy water and sacred ground. Because we, isn't that what we are? Holy water and sacred ground blended together. And what will it take for us to do this? Well, we have to be born again. Yep, born again. Now let me explain. Actually, that Buddhist teacher and poet Gary Snyder explained. He says, for the non-Native American to become at home on this continent, he or she must be born again in this hemisphere, on this continent, properly called Turtle Island. Many Native American cultures refer to this continent as Turtle Island in their mythology, and Snyder argues that it is time to reintegrate ourselves into what is now our native habitat, this sacred ground, and the holy water that surrounds it. Our culture, while distinct from European cultures in some ways, remains the foundation of our national identity. But this land on which we live, the land most of us were born, where we have buried our ancestors, the land from which our children and grandchildren were made from. For generations, we have built our communities, our houses, our entire lives on a way of life that was native to another continent and another time. We build to dominate nature. We build what we want in spite of nature. They're demanding in Houston now that we build a seawall. Keep the water out. It's just going to push it somewhere else. Somebody else will suffer so that we can have a big city where maybe a big city doesn't belong. We build to dominate. What would it look like if we built our communities to work in cooperation with nature? What would it look like if we saw ourselves as native to this land? I'm not saying we should give up modern technology or our modern mindset. We need our modern mindset. The same mindset that has overcome the limits of inclusion found in most ancient cultures, including older Native American cultures. Because most tribal communities, Native mythology did not recognize the full humanity of those born outside the tribe. If you were other, you weren't one of the people. So in this way, society has matured. But at what expense? So I'm thinking that a Renaissance is in order, which, not coincidentally, literally means reborn or born again. With the first Renaissance, we adopted the scientific method. We learned to look at our world objectively, to study how it all works. And we've done a good job at that. But here's the thing about the scientific method. Just because in the laboratory we try to look at the world objectively, it doesn't mean that the world is made of mere objects alone. Because when a plant is just a plant, an animal is just an animal, a person, just a person. When we treat living beings as objects for our use, then polluting a river, filling a swamp, injecting dangerous chemicals into the ground, that's no big deal. Just another thing. The objectification of women, it's all connected. Racism, the objectification of people who look different, it's all connected. All the ways that society demeans and belittles what is deemed other or deemed as an object. To be born again, means that we shed the illusion of objectivity. The illusion that life, all life, is just an object. It's adopting the mindset that everything has inherent worth and dignity. A new Renaissance recognizes that the ground is sacred, all ground. that all water is holy, while holding on to the good and useful elements of the first Renaissance. But to get there, we must first create a vision. For without a clear vision, we are but children lost in an endless maze of confusion. We need to know where we're going. Not always exactly how we're going to get there, but we need to know where we're going. So to close, I'd like to close with these words by Gary Snyder. May they help us find our way. It's called For All. Ah, to be alive on a mid-September morn, fording a stream, barefoot, pants rolled up, holding boots, pack on, sunshine, ice in the shallows, northern Rockies. Rustle and shimmer of icy creek waters, stones turn underfoot, small and hard as toes, cold nose dipping, singing inside, creek music, heart music, smell of sun on gravel. I pledge allegiance to the soil of Turtle Island and to the beings who thereon dwell, one ecosystem in diversity under the sun with joyful interpenetration for all. So be it. Amen. Blessed be.